Theme is a very vast theme. You know, if I were the organizer, I would have devoted one full day to this theme because there is so much to talk about. But let's also learn the art of summarizing and show that we can adhere to the time limits that is given to us.
Context. Dr. Gustavo Canzobre is an Indologist specializing in the art and classical philosophy of India, as well as the artistic and educational philosophy of Rabindranath Tagore. He's headmaster of the Hastinapur Foundation School of Eastern Philosophy Professors, director of the radio program Niketan for the dissemination of Indian culture among Spanish speakers, cultural manager of India-Latin American relations with the Indian Embassy in ICCR, and lectures in Spanish and English in Latin America, Spain, and India. He co-founded Hastinapur Publishing House in 1982, which is devoted to translating in classical Indian literature into Spanish. And he's a member of the India Committee of Carril, an Argentine think tank since 2013, and cultural advisor on films and documentaries on India.
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank the authorities of IIC and ICCR of this event and of this important gathering to think about this relation between Argentina, Latin America, and Caribbean and India, and also to place me in this panel because it's an honor for me not only to be here, but to share the same panel with two people I admire and I've learned so much from them. Oscar Pujol, head of Sanskrit studies for us, the Spanish speakers, and Shamu Ganguly. So thank you, all of you. We will deal today as Shamu, as Professor Shyam Prasad Ganguly mentioned, on the relationship of how people get involved from the beginning of the 20th century to the actual Indian thought. And the purpose of my presentation is to show how this happened among women. They are very well known, all the men that were crucial for the knowledge, for the establishing a bond. We will go through that began much earlier. India and the Eastern culture was very influential in the process of building a national identity for Argentina along the second half of 19th century. And their men played a central role. And some points, important points in 1951, Lucio Mansilla, one of the first Argentinians to get to India, and also in 1869, the first review of Ramayana in Spanish literature, a review in 2 volumes of an important magazine, and so on. At the same time that in Spain was published Bhagavad Gita, first Bhagavad Gita edition, also in Argentina it was. But the beginning of the 20th century holds a different way to approach India. And so we want to answer this question of what changed in the 20th century in order to get a deep connection with Argentina, with India. And also to stress the importance of the work of women, like as Jorge Volpi said in the opening conference, women are usually the one not mentioned, the one forgotten, and the one misplaced. So the role of this presentation will show how decisive was this. In fact, nowadays, the heads of the main cultural and spiritual relations in Argentina, between Argentina and India, are all women. So that's not random, that's not a simple fact. It's really the importance of how women have understood and been involved in the Indian culture. We will stress on two, on two characters, one on the first half of the 20th century, Adelina del Carril de Guiraldes. I have on purpose not put her wedding surname, because she is usually mentioned only as the wife of Ricardo Guiraldes, but she was an important character in her own. And she lived between 1889 and 1967. And in order to begin, I will ask you to go back to the night of August 14th, 1947. You are very aware, being Indians, what happened that night, and let me tell you something. Bangalore, at night. Everybody had gathered at the house to listen to one of the few radios that would broadcast the news coming from Delhi. It had been brought from far away, only one radio. There were also 5 or 6 Swamis and some brahmacharis from the Ramakrishna ashram nearby. Suddenly, after a little radio interference, Pandit Nehru's voice appeared out of the brown cloth of the Philco radio. It was 12 at the midnight, and his voice sounded like thunder inside each head. At the stroke of midnight, when the word slips, India will awake to life and freedom. The monks were weeping. They couldn't believe what they heard and witnessed. The skies of India were lightened by fireworks. As if possessed by magic powers, people jumped into the streets and began to dance frenetically. Among them, there she was, dancing, with her eyes closed, wrapped in joy. It was her, Mamita, the strange Argentine woman that had come to live in the Gowda's house, the same person that would take care of Ramachandra, one of the Gowda's sons, for the rest of her life. Few people knew who she was, how she had arrived there, whom she had met, what her role would be in spreading the knowledge of India in her country. However, they would call her Mamita, Mami in English. Adelina del Carril tells us the origin of her nickname. You may know that there I have even changed my name. They only know me as Mamita, thanks to this blessed little boy of mine, Ramu. My name is very complicated for these people, so even the letters are addressed to me as Madame Mamita. How did an Argentine woman came along to live in Bangalore in the 40s? Well, let me tell you. Adelina del Carril was one of the 13 children of an aristocratic family from Buenos Aires. Her grandfather had been vice president of Argentina between 54 and 1860. And she and her sister were famous because they both get involved with famous artists. Her sister, Delia del Carril, was second wife of Pablo Neruda after his first divorce. They had been born in a ranch in Buenos Aires where they were homeschooled, as you know, in the aristocratic families at home. And when Adelina met Ricardo Guiraldes first time, they were both characters of the mainstream of literary careers in Buenos Aires. She met him when she was 16, and when she was 21, you can see her there. She married Ricardo Guiraldes in 1913. There she is with him. And she was really a key role in Guiraldes' literary career. Guiraldes even thought once to leave the career, and Adelina was the one who pushed him to keep on. And here they are visiting Villa Ocampo when Gurudev Tagore was there. They were both key figures of the new Argentine culture being developed. You know, that generation of Argentine thinkers, poets and writers and politicians, most of them were involved with the Eastern thought and with India in particular. We won't deal about them. But soon Guiraldes, they traveled again to Europe. He had already been in Europe. He had already been in India even when he was in Europe when he was young. But at that time he was in another move, you know, a young poet, 25 years old in Paris in 1910. He wouldn't be very careful about what India meant, and he was proposed to come to India. He came, he wrote a letter when he was traveling in a train to Madurai, and he would see the women, the Tamil women, and he won't understand really anything about India. But as soon as he was again in Europe in 1919, some friend gave him the Edward Jouret Great Initiates, and although that's a very funny literature piece, it's very inspiring, and so out from that, he began to get involved and to get interested in India. But Adelina realized he was interested in not the real Indian thought. She used to find him with Ramacharaka's book, trying to do pranayama under the ombus in La Pampa out of what he was reading in the book. So Adelina pushed him close to the real Indian thought, at first with Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Patanjali, and so from then on, Guiraldes get really so involved with the Eastern and Indian thought that the last month of, along the last years of his life, he began to write a kind of diary of his spiritual travel that Adelina published once he was dead, that is called The Path. And we will see there what he writes the 2 or 3 nights before he passes away. He says, "Have I had the faintest glimpse of what would be called ecstasy? Yes." Well, he passed away being very young out of cancer, getting himself prepared to what he was calling the journey, being close to these new spiritual feelings he had. Adelina buries him in their hometown, San Antonio de Areco, and from then on she is very disappointed. She feels very lost, but suddenly she finds in 1932 in Buenos Aires a Ramakrishna ashram. One of the first Ramakrishna ashrams opened in America, in fact the first one in Latin America. A very funny story, we won't deal with it, but shortly a group of devotees wrote in 1930 to Belur Math asking for a monk. Please send us a monk, we want to know about the Vedantine tradition. And from Belur Math, they did so in 1932. Swami Vijayananda went, and since then he stayed in Argentina. He began to lecture a few months later. He came. And in 1933, we find in the archives of the ashram that Adelina del Carril is lecturing at the ashram on the life and teachings of Swami Vivekananda and Swami Ramakrishna. The attachment to the spiritual teaching make her reborn and find a new meaning for life. And 4 years later, she comes to India in 1937 to a parliament of religions that was held in Kolkata, organized by Belur Math. And there she speaks as a Latin America representative on Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. It was done because of the 100th anniversary of the born of Sri Ramakrishna. And when she's there, she says, okay, this is my spiritual country. I have to stay here, and Ricardo's soul will be here with me. Since she wouldn't be able to take him because they were planning to go there, but Guiraldes died in Paris in 1927. And so she decided to stay there in Kolkata, but due to the climate, the monks suggested not staying there and go to Bangalore. That's why she went to Ramakrishna Math in Bangalore. And one day, because of the hard sun, she was suggested to go through a house, And she walked through the Gouda's house and found a 4-year-old guy who adopted her as her step-mother. A long story, this guy would be taken then to Argentina, and he stayed his last 30 years in Argentina, but that would require a lecture itself, the life of Ramachandra Gouda in Argentina. She not only stayed at the ashram, she began to translate into Spanish the great works of Sri Ramakrishna, the 3 volumes of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, although she requested not to be quoted as the translator. She also translated Swami Vivekananda's works. And she stayed there at the ashram with the monks in Bangalore, and 7 years later, her brother died. That was a very disappointing time for her. She was so needed of spiritual guides, so in who she thought? In Ramana Maharshi. So she took the trouble with his boy, a long trouble that is shown there by Juan Marín in La India Eterna, a book, and she tells us about this experience, and I quote, "The first time I saw him, he was walking towards me with his cane. My knees trembled, and I fell to the ground, and lying face down, I grabbed his ankles and cried with all my heart." And there she decided to stay at the ashram. She was living 3 months at the ashram with his boy, and she recovered her soul and found a new life again out of the companion of the Ramana. It's funny, she's even told in the Sai Baba group of devotees, because of being the first Argentine devotee of Sai Baba, because some months later she was invited to a social meeting by Maharani, and there she was introduced to a young Sai Baba that was only 22 years old. And well, it happened all the particular things you know that happen when somebody says he meets Sai Baba, and all the things that appear, and the vibhuti and so on. And she used to say that she kept that vibhuti till the last days of her life. But what was important is that she stayed there in India here for 6 more years. She completed a period of 14 years from 1937 to 1951. She went back to Argentina with her boy. She never adopted him. He is appointed as being the adopted boy of Ricardo Guiraldes. Ricardo Guiraldes had died 7 years ago before Adelina met this boy. But you know, this tendency of attaching to men the things that are not happening to men. And in fact, she didn't adopt him. She only got a permission for the family to go 1 year to Argentina and come back. But in fact, she never came back, and Ramachandra only came back after her death. Horacio Ruiz, that was a great follower of Guiraldes and described Adelina's travel in an ICCR publication, the famous Papeles de la India, says that her life was a yatra, and that yatra took her through India and then back to Argentina, and so she was one of the first leaders of letting people know, not just the occultists, you know, all these heads of the Argentine intelligentsia were linked to all the occultist and theosophist movement, and not to the real deep Indian thought. And Adelina was one of the first in order to let people get involved in the reading of the Indian scriptures themselves, and not just what was getting there through the theosophy link.
Gustavo, just 2 minutos más.
Okay. So, at the same time, Adelina goes back to Argentina. In 1951, an Argentine woman born in Corrientes province. It was Ada Albrecht, born in 1932, and she was she had been born out of a German theosophist who emigrated to Argentina. She was since very little involved with Bhagavad Gita. Her father told her Bhagavad Gita at when she was 4, and also got out compassion, a strong compassion since she was very child. There is the first poem she wrote when she was 7, since it was an artistic family. She uses to say, because she's still alive, she's about to be 91 next Sunday, and she uses to say that she learned how to play the piano before writing, and there she writes a poem on how she was involved seeing the newsboy that was selling the papers at the eclosion of the Second War. She had the dream to work for the welfare of people, to build a hospital, and so she said, how will I raise funds to build a hospital? I will be a soprano singer that will let me fundraise my dream. And in fact, she was a top soprano singer. But at the same time, something happened that in 1961, Sri Ram, the president of the Theosophical Society, went to Argentina. She had been involved in youth movements she created inside the Theosophical movement, because she saw that Theosophy was very attached to all its doctrine and not open to general people. And so she went there, and at the Alvear Palace where Sri Ram lectured, it was a full hall, and at the back she was there, and Sri Ram looked at her and asked her to come, and she said, okay, stay near me. And they get a relationship that is shown in one of her books, unpublished books, Cartas de mi Maestro. Well, when Sri Ram was about to die in 1973, he asked her to come to India, and for the surprise of everybody, he didn't give her Theosophical masters. He said, no, not here. And he addressed her to 3 Vedantic monks in Dehradun, in the Pre-Himalayas, and he said, this is what you have to learn, not more Theosophy. So out of that, she was 1 year in India in 1973, and then another extra year in 1976. She also kept link with the music and all the traditional way of living, but the sign of her life was compassion. The monks should see that she was a bit sad, and they asked her, what's happening? And she said, okay, I cannot stand seeing the cows so needed of food, and the boys so naked and walking barefoot in the streets. She would even fight with their monks, because they would say, oh, okay, that's Maya. No, Maya, I have to feed them. That's the real spirituality and compassion. Okay, so out of that, she went back to Argentina, and she did 3 things. The first thing was she got out of the Theosophical movements, and even another movement she had founded with her husband, because she had now clear the idea, 1978, of what she has to do. And that's the year I met her, when she first came back with the Vedantic teachings the monk gave them. She bought a piece of land in 1979 to build an ashram. She wrote a book in order to let the people know the Vedantic philosophy. And in the last minutes, I finish my presentation. While I speak, I will let you know in a video how the ashram she built looks like. I think. Sorry. There's something that has to be done, and I have forgotten. That.
Which one, please?
Yes, that one. That's right. And so she, the third thing was founding in 1981 with the group of disciples that we were close to her, the Hastinapur Foundation, a foundation devoted to spreading the spiritual wisdom of India, but not attached to an Indian cult, to an Indian way of religion, to a no confession, just for the spirituality that we Latin Americans can live in a particular way that is not the way the Indians themselves do. And there she developed from Argentina to Uruguay to Bolivia, at first to Chile also, and to Colombia, an institution. She stayed there at the ashram and organized the philosophy classes, the yoga classes, the meditation classes in 30 branches all along the country, although the place to train and to be close to the feeling of the spirituality is the ashram itself, but the headquarters are in Buenos Aires. And in order to close my presentation, she took some important shloka from the Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter, where Krishna says that, well, Oscar will forgive me. Oh, here it is, yes. In the 11th shloka from the 4th chapter, that it says, Ye yata mam prapadayante, tanstaeva vajam yaham, mama vartamanu vartante, manushyaha partha sarvashaha. In whatever way men approach me, even so do I reward them. My path do men tread in all ways, O Arjuna. Out of that shloka, she developed this spiritual movement in order that each person can find that its soul is divine and that there is a strong and natural connection between us and the mystery that we sometimes call God, and but it's beyond all words and all ideas. It relates to a feeling and to a way of looking life, and if compassion is there, wisdom will be there. That's the main teaching we got from her. And just closing that, in the last year, she was recognized by the Indian government on what she had done. The ambassador in Argentina, Dinesh Bhatia, was there in 2021. Well, she did a lot of publications. We founded the Hastinapur Publishing House. We translated whole Mahabharata into Spanish and developed a special corpus of 5,000 notes in order to the modern people know how to address to Mahabharata. Her main work was translating shloka by shloka and comment Bhagavad Gita. But just to close, she also translated Vinoba Bhave's commentaries on Bhagavad Gita. There are her personal notes of the translation. And on November 2021, Ambassador Dinesh Bhatia was with her doing Angovastra. I learned yesterday the term. And Prime Minister Modi spoke about her in his
Man Ki Baat.
Man Ki Baat weekly program that will be the end, just to let you see, will be the, then again, no, I cannot. No. It's only 50 seconds, sorry. And she never, in fact, if it were for her feelings, she would have stayed in India. India was her spiritual place, but she knew that if she stayed in India, she won't be able to teach. So she left India knowing that she will never come back, although I think she never left India. In fact, because India, as one Swami once told about somebody who was so eager to come to India, but was so busy in his life, and this Swami Tilak Maharaj, that passed away in Spain in 1984, he said, no, don't worry. If you are in peace, India will be there, and you will be in India. if you are not in peace, you don't need to go to India because you won't reach India. And that's the way Albrecht, being all her life in her heart, attached to this spiritual and immortal legacy that India has led to the world without any cult restrictions, without saying you can come, you cannot come, has shown how strong is and keeps being. Nowadays we have around 4,000 regular students at the different branches, and how Latin American people is so involved in this legacy that tells you you are important, you are a treasure, you have a treasure inside you. Devote your life so that that treasure spreads out in the benefit of all the people, of all the living beings that are close to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gustavo. This is an intra-history where women take the principal role, and this is happening in Argentina. This is really, an eye-opener for many of us,